Um, so Roger has come from a very different farming background, with in the 60s and 70s, running a huge enterprise down in Cambridgeshire, no livestock. And now he is busy transforming a smaller holding on Lismore in a really pioneering regenerative farming project. We've got so little time to talk on this call, Roger, that it's really tempting for me to get straight into farming practices and what you're doing differently. But I think it's probably best for us to understand how you see farming sitting in the whole overall ecosystem, and what is regenerative farming, if you could speak to that.
I'm 76 years old, and I can honestly say that my life's work started when I was 70. So 6 years have seen huge changes for me. There was a huge paradigm shift for me about 8 years ago, watching a film by a woman called Rebecca Hosking, who some of you might have come across, in a film called A Farm for the Future. And in the time it took to watch the film, I had my whole belief system completely reversed. Everything that I believed in, worked at during the whole of my working life from age 17, I found myself not believing anymore. So it was shocking. I didn't sleep very well for a week or two after watching that. So we then started to look at I'd spent my life climbing a farming ladder. I was really successful. We were farming 1,500 acres. It was a very smart farming operation. Climbed the farming ladder, got to the top of the ladder, and found out that it was against the wrong wall. So that's how it felt 7, 8 years ago. I want to come at food from a completely different direction. I think the way that we manage our land now, the consequences of that have been to produce nutrient-dense food. And I think probably to start by saying that I think there's a fundamental truth, and that's that the foundation of life on this planet and the future of us as a species rests in soil biology. Now, when I was farming way back, when I was 17 years old, from that time onwards, nobody ever mentioned soil biology. It was never mentioned at agricultural college. It was never mentioned by all the smart people that I used to work with, agronomists and such. And it was only a subject that came to the fore about 5 years ago. And we at Salon produce nutrient-dense food or not, depending on whether our soils are living or not. Soil without soil biology is just geology. And I came to realize that actually I'd been farming geology down in the fens. We had soil that was lifeless. So I'm now coming from a place where we have to realize that soil biology relies on sun for its food through the catalyst of green growing material. To convert carbon dioxide into sugars, which are then exchanged through the plant's root exudates for plant food that has been mined by the little critters that we have underground. So, it's stunning to realize that there's 10 times the volume and weight of life underground than there is life above ground. So if we want to solve our climate change challenge, all we have to do is to realize that the planet runs on sunshine. All we've got to do is harvest it. Now, we learn about photosynthesis at school and then promptly forget about it, and yet it's what the planet runs on. So I would say that we're going into this climate change solution mode in a technological sense. Technology is our first call for quick fixes. The problem is with quick fixes is that they have unintended consequences down the track. I'm living with the unintended consequences of what I did in my very young farming days back in the early 60s, you know, the Green Revolution and all that stuff. So if we can get a hold of the idea that all we have to do is cover the Earth's surface with green growing material, then we have the job done. And it's like recognizing that technology, wonderful though it might be, is not likely to be the answer to our problems, because we live in a biological universe. And I look at what's around me now in total awe and wonder, and realize that we all live in this beautiful, circular, perfect system. It's a whole which we don't necessarily connect with. And I think if you think of all the stuff that we have in the universe being connected to a piece of string, and we take action, whatever it is, on a daily basis, it's like pulling that string and recognizing that when we pull the string, everything moves. So the power of what we're discovering here is that we have to be whole systems thinkers. We can't deal with today's problems in isolation and think that we can fix what we're doing today by taking some kind of action. It can be mostly, in the case of us as human beings, it's technological. And if we take action in the technological sense as a quick fix, it's going to have dire unintended consequences down the track. You know, we're working with ecosystem processes, you know, the water cycle, nutrient cycle, energy flow, that's photosynthesis, and community dynamics, that's life above and below ground. And we're dealing with our farming enterprise in the holistic sense. We're getting away from reductionist thinking, which is the quick fix deal. You know,
Roger, I'm really sorry, I've got to interrupt here. We're going to be running out of time, so thank you very much. But we will have to move on to the next speaker.
It's just such a big subject.
It's a fascinating topic. I really like the idea of a piece of string attached to everything.
From chatting with Roger earlier, I was lucky enough to get his views on things, and I think it is worth, if people can, I will, once I've finished introducing the candidates, we'll put some links on the side there, because the Salient project is incredible and it explains farming in a way that I'd never heard before. And that's important because we have our own acreage to deal with. So it's at least affecting ours and may have some real relevance for other farms. Okay, if I just need to check we've got the other people that we were expecting on the call. So have we got Owen on the call?
Yeah, Owen's on and Wallace is ready too.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Well done for getting everybody back, by the way. So I want to just introduce Owen next. Owen is not from Argyll, but I think what he's going to speak about has a huge relevance for us. Owen runs a project called Cari Mar, and you can correct my Welsh on that if you'd like, Owen. And it's restorative ocean farming, and other people might know it as sort of multi-trophic aquaculture or something of that sort. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Owen. I think people are going to find this interesting, and I think you've got many hats on, but particularly today, we're going to be looking at that the shellfish and seaweed project that you have off the coast of St David. And I suppose rather like Roger, it was tempting to drive straight into, you know, how does that work? You know, how do the cages work and things like that? That's how my brain works. But if you could first tell us how the project started and what was the importance of setting up the project the way it has been set up.
Yeah, thank you, David, and thank you, everyone. I always usually you start talking about all the food side of it and the exciting bits. And as I was saying to David earlier, the extraordinary thing about the last 2 years is the development of a community benefit society, which has got like 105 people who have all created the Community Benefit Society that with the aims to improve marine ecosystems and create coastal jobs and produce healthy and sustainable food. And it's Carumor, and it means for the love of the sea. Yeah, all right. So it's because of that group of people, we've managed to get started with some seaweed and shellfish farming, yeah, which that ticks all the boxes. It improves the marine ecosystem, creates jobs, and produces sustainable food.
I mean, just as a start point, just I suppose up in Argyll, we're quite used to seeing vast ocean farming in the more conventional sense. How would it be substantially different? And what are what's the key thing about the multi-trophic or ocean restorative ocean farming system that people need to understand?
Yeah. Okay. So the main inspiration and the really easy thing to do, rather than listening to me chundering on, going around in circles saying I'm a lot, is look at greenwave.org. Yeah, it's an American organization. So it's greenwave.org, and it's beautifully summarized, and it's got some interesting pictures as well instead of looking at me. Basically, it's called net zero input farming. So there's no water, no fertilizer, no pesticide, and you're improving the seas by all the things that the seaweed and the shellfish are sucking out of it. So it's just extraordinary, and it works. Why aren't we doing loads and loads of it? Because you've got to get something called a marine license. Yeah, and I used to look an awful lot younger when I started trying to get a marine license, and 2 years have gone past. We got one for a trial farm, which produces about enough food for me, because I like a lot of seafood, but you're not going to feed whales with it. So we've been struggling to get a marine license now for another 7 months, and this is extraordinary. Down here, the Welsh government has spent an awful lot of money on feasibility studies, saying how wonderful our coastline is, and how much potential aquaculture has, and how much good it can do. And everybody agrees with them who's got a brain cell. And you say, right, okay, then well let's start. Let's get going then. Yeah. And so there's no money and no support. Yeah. So if you're a young person who's worried about the future, and you've got a few marine skills, and perhaps you saved a couple of grand or something, you forget it. Yeah, just forget it. Go to the city like everyone else and get a job. So go back to the green wave thing. One of the objectives is to get the licensing thing sorted out, and there's so many good people involved all the way around: Welsh government, NRW, whatever it is, but banging people's heads together to make it happen is the challenge. Hopefully by Christmas we might have a license for a bigger farm, but yeah, I wouldn't put my house on it. No.
Well, there's an old expression that we used to hear sometimes, that the pioneers take the arrows and the settlers take the land. And so I guess a lot of the not to be frivolous on that, but a lot of the pain that you're suffering is opening the door for other people, and the groundwork you've laid with the regulatory bodies, etc. I would hope might make the opportunity more readily available to participants wanting to look at it for Argyll. Scotland reasonably well. How much of an opportunity do you think there could be in Argyll?
Okay, so to wind back a bit, we ran out of money in December. We put about 50 grand in to start. That's all we could afford, and we spent all that on application fees and insurances and God knows what else. So we got the trial farms in the water in August. And the seaweed grows like hell, and the native oysters, I can't manage to kill them, which is rare for me, because I got a good track record of killing stuff I try and grow. The mussel spatfall is extraordinary. I bought a whole lot of lantern nets from a wonderful man called Lucio in Italy, and then obviously was told you can't use lantern nets, that'll kill everything. Yeah, no. but it hasn't. It's extraordinary. The scallops and everything have grown. But as I said, we ran out of money. So in December, with COVID and Christmas coming, we did a pioneer share offer, which is something you can do with a community benefit society. So the community benefit society is just owned for the community. No one's going to benefit out of it. If you work for it and get a job with it, great. But that's it. We were told, well, don't bother. And I thought, well, if we don't bother, we just got to pack it in. So you had to do it online because you couldn't meet anyone because of COVID. And we ended up with 80, I think it's about 90 odd thousand now from 58 people. Now, a fair few of those come from Scotland, yeah, because I spent years working up the oyster farm and one thing and another. And even the ones who haven't given money, there are people who've supported and helped. I got some oyster growing baskets and all the rest of it from a wonderful lady called Judith Vach, Caledonian Oysters. And yeah, I worked around there, yeah, and with them for a fair few years. And then there's people from like Walter Spears involved with the seaweed up there, and Dr. Nick Lake from the Scottish Shellfish Association, Janet Brown, who writes The Grower, which is a shellfish. You know, they are so supportive of what we're trying to do. We've got any queries, you know, they're so helpful. And out of those, all those people who put money in but support, you know, there's a fair few around the St. David's Peninsula, which is just obviously a little pointy bit off the end. But you know, they're spread all over the place. And they're all different ages and all different skills. And it's extraordinary. And yeah, and it's very frightening because all I've ever done is run small trout farms and oyster farms, and you know, whereas this is trying to deal with people who just put their hand up and say, oh yeah, we'll give you a hand with that. And yeah, it's really very bizarre, but yeah, it is great. It is great. There's a lot of good people out there. You don't often hear about them a lot. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. And I suppose to summarise it, without the structure of your, without it being a community benefit society, I suspect very few of those people would have been interested in helping you out with that share offer.
I without a doubt, and I think we've been lucky. There's been 2 or 3 people in the area who one's a boat builder, and his dad has been supplying the RSPB island for years in Ramsey Sound, which is a very, very dangerous piece of water. And they thought it was a great idea, and they'd started doing a pilot mussel farm years ago, and then one of them had a stroke. And so, you know, we turned up and I said, well, we'll have a go again in a marine license. And they said, well, good luck with that, but don't give up your full-time job. And, you know, when we got it, it was like, oh, we're in, we're absolutely in. And what I mean by in is, you know, they got boats, they got expertise, they're just totally voluntary. And it's extraordinary. You know, it would cost you tens of thousands to get a contractor to do these sort of things. And then there's 2 local fishermen who are really interested in it and have supported it. And it just grows from there. And I suppose, you know, that is the key, isn't it? Is finding those people with the marine skills and setting up an organization that is honestly for the community. You know, it's yeah.
I think you know, I could see a huge. Obviously, would love to talk longer. I think I could see a huge relevance here, particularly for Argyll, particularly with the history of crofting. Particularly with the natural resources that are available. It just seems that something that I'm sure people are going to want to follow up. So thank you very much for taking a short period of time with us.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I look forward to coming up. I'm hopefully going to collect some scallop spat from up your way very shortly. So yeah, great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Have we got Wallace on the call?
Yeah, I'm here, David. How are you getting on?
Not too bad. You're with us on your connection on the Isle of Arran or in Dumfries?
No, I'm not. Back in Dumfriesshire. So yeah, fine.
Really happy to welcome you, Wallace. And again, what I've learned from this is that people, particularly in this sector, seem to be wearing many different hats, and yours is particularly multi-peaked, let's say. So you're a lecturer at SRC, almost a foodie writer. I was following the Rural Kitchen website and channel there, and then we're finding you popping up on BBC the Local with your own channel there. So all that, as well as practically farming as well. I guess it's a silly question really, but which one of your roles do you feel most at home with?
All the ones you've said, I feel at home with all of them. I think to class myself as a farmer anymore would be a stretch. I might do the lambing each year, maybe a harvest here and there, and during term holidays I'll go home and work on the farm, but and also working on the farm at SRUC. So I'd say the main two are the Rural to Kitchen podcast host and also the lecturer. Yeah.
Okay, but you were brought up on Arran on a upland farm of a decent size.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. Yep.
And Arran is sort of often being described as Scotland in miniature in a way. Yeah. So you can be able to see the whole breadth of issues that upland farmers face in producing food for our local market and beyond. I wonder if that gives you a unique perspective on sort of food security, food miles, whether you could speak to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, first off, I should say thank you for asking me on. Very honoured to be here. I think I've probably got less life than some people have experience here. So thank you very much for having me. I'm feeling quite out of my depth, but apart from that, it's good to be here. Yeah, what you're saying there, I remember being about 12, I think, and hearing the local abattoir on Arran closing down, and our lambs that we would often send maybe 4 or 5, maybe 6 lambs away a year to go in our freezers throughout the course of the winter, sort of thing. And I remember that instead of them going to Blackwater Foot, which was 5 miles down the road, have I frozen? Maybe I haven't.
No, you're good.
There. Instead of them going 5 miles down the road to the local village, they were now going to Mull because the local abattoir closing, and that's like a 212-mile round journey. And I remember thinking, why is this happening? Like, what is going on? This is such a waste of fuel and everything. This is as a kid, and looking at it, it's really not a big issue. It's quite minimal, and it started to get me interested in all that. And I started to look at how far food was traveling, and the way I've always thought of it is, has your food traveled more today than you have in a lifetime, or have you just sort of went out into the shed next door and picked up a few eggs, or the shop down the road who's got eggs from a farm a mile away? And it's really started to sort of like mold my life lately. I mean, I bought this house, and when I'm buying food, I'm always trying to buy that sort of Scottish brand, that sort of thing, which I think is good. And I think we've got a real good red meat story here in Argyll, but in Scotland in general really. If you've got ground up on a hill that, okay, maybe you could grow some crops on. Another thing you could definitely do is trees, and we'll come on to that in a minute, David, but if you've got beef or lamb or something being raised on there, that's an insane amount of protein for what we could be growing in comparison if it was a food. And I think if it was a plant, sorry. And I think we've really got to push that narrative. And I think people are getting behind that narrative at the minute. With COVID, people are more invested in where their food comes from. People are more sort of interested in their own impact. I mean, the whole thing I've always heard was, I don't have a carbon footprint, I drive everywhere. Sort of looking away from that is got to be a good thing. Considering the driving, I think we all drive just shy of 300 miles a year to pick up food, and that's got to change things. That's got to change. But yeah, I think I probably went off on a tangent there, but I think Argyll, obviously Arran based, but Scotland in general has a really good story there that we have to push, and we're starting to push it, like QMS, Make It Scotch, that sort of thing, are doing a good job there.
Yeah, so it's good, sort of a series of certification schemes. Sometimes they come, sometimes they go, sometimes they. Do you think the consumer understands fully what they're getting when they buy those products, or why are more people adhering to those standards and seeking them out?
I think a lot of stuff came out with this Australian trade deal. I looked into it a lot, and I'd considered sort of where food comes from my whole university, like academic career sort of thing. And the welfare standards in Australia is relatively low. I don't know if there's potential there for a two-pronged approach, because they have a massive export market to China. But then if we are going to be in there as well, then does the standards of the stuff coming from Australia have to be as good as ours? If not, you're going to see an extremely reduced price, and then ours is going to be outcompeted. Folk are going to say, oh, well, it's just a steak. Like, how can it be different? And the truth is, in the product, there's not going to be a massive difference to the untrained tongue, but the sort of backdrop of that is quite scary. Sorry, your question was, sorry.
No, I just
sorry, Wallace. I'm just going to jump in because we're out of time, unfortunately.
That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Wallace.
Yeah, no, we had wanted to go on to talking about future trends in upland farming, and I'm sorry we didn't get the time to do that.
Not at all.
Thank you so much for joining us.
We're going to move on now to our next section, which is about energy. And I'd like to see if Andy Clements is on the call, which I think he is. No, maybe not. Are you there, Andy? If not, I will skip on because I've seen Steve Marshall, who's our second speaker already. Or maybe they're just joining in from the other room. Is either Andy or Steve ready to talk about energy?
Yeah, Steve here. I'm available.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much. So I'd like to introduce Steve. He works for Crookham Power Station, which is just up the way from us, north of Oban. And they are a facility that does energy storage. And can I start by asking Steve, now I'm all confused myself. Why is energy storage going to be so important in the next decade or decades as we move towards a renewable grid?
Well, I think as we move towards decarbonising our country to meet net zero, Crookham and a proposed expansion of Crookham will help deploy more wind energy. So one of the advantages of pump storage is, as well as generating electricity, it takes electricity off the grid. So when we reverse the turbines, it pumps. So rather than switch wind farms off and rely on gas power stations down south, we can actually keep more of the wind farms or the solar farms connected to the grid, and we just operate the turbines or the pumps at Crookham. So with Crookham 1 and 2 together, you would have 1 gigawatt of power. And that could be potentially lost. That could be renewable energy, could be lost to the system. Whereas if we pump the turbines, it remains connected to the grid. So that's important. But another function of pump storage is, as well as being able to generate and pump, it can operate in spinning on air. So it stabilises the grid. So solar and wind turbines are not synchronised to 50 hertz to the grid. So they can generate power, but in order to get that power down to the places of demand and down from Argyll, north of Scotland, across the border into England, you need a large spinning massive turbine.
That's a sort of technical role that Crookham can fulfil.
Yeah, so it stabilises voltages, it stabilises the frequency of the grid, and it helps actually push the power down the line. So it fulfills a various amount of functions that national grids require of us. So that's why it may not seem it, but Crookham works constantly 24/7 a day. All the different types of changes it does.
To keep that function going, yeah. And so what's the... So am I right in thinking that Crookham's like a massive battery where you pump the water uphill and then its potential energy is increased, and as it comes downhill, it's just creating power like you would switch on and off a gas power plant?
Yes, exactly that. Think about a giant water battery. So when prices are low, like overnight, when demand is low, we can pump water up to the surface, or when there's a lot of renewable generation. So when the wind's blowing really hard during the day, we can pump. And then as that wind decreases or solar comes off at night time, in daytime peaks at winter time, we release that water down from the upper reservoir down to the bottom reservoir through the turbines generating power. And if we fill the upper reservoir to full capacity, Cruachan, if all 4 units are running, would power a city the size of Glasgow for 16, 17 hours. So
Wow.
we've got that amount of energy. So we need all types of energy storage, short durations, but also the longer duration, and pump storage comes into its element. Anything more than 4-hour storage, pump storage is the most cost-effective measure in terms of pounds per kilowatt or pounds per megawatt to build. Unfortunately, it's very expensive to build, and that's why we've not had many since the mid-1980s.
So it's the initial cost, and then they run for years and years, isn't it?
The initial costs, a new pump storage would cost between £500 million and £1 billion to construct.
Okay.
And the revenues are uncertain. You don't generate a lot of power from it, maybe 15% of your total maximum, because you're sometimes in pump mode, sometimes in generation mode, and then you've got the other services. So revenues are uncertain without grid. So it could operate subsidy free, but we just need to underwrite that cost in some way and how to do that. But
Underwrite it into the future.
Yes, but having all the amount of storage really would benefit the consumer, because you wouldn't be paying wind farms to switch off. You don't need new power lines all across Scotland and England. You don't need other gas generators to produce all the services. So something like an expanded Cruachan would save over £350 million over 20, 30 years to consumer. So over £20 million a year. So it's a very cost-effective measure. And of course, it doesn't generate any direct emissions as well. So all of that's beneficial.
Yeah. And at the moment, is it working? I imagine in the future, the aim is that Cruachan will only be pumping uphill when there's excess renewables, because that would be the most effective carbon thing. Is there that massive excess of carbon or low carbon energy production now, or is it that you're lacking in some way the capacity of renewables that can make it as good at carbon storage, low carbon energy storage?
Yeah, there isn't really any other long-term energy storage that's proven technology other than pump storage. There's some liquid air and some compressed air. They're not as efficient. Pump storage has efficiency rates of what we call round-trip efficiency of 85%, so really high efficiency rates. We don't lose a lot of energy through that. So it really is probably the most effective storage measure. And we do have a lot of wind generation and a further 10 gigawatts of offshore wind are planned between now and 2030. So rather than when the wind speeds are really high and you've got all that excess energy, rather than switch them off and pay the operators to have them switched off, because they have been penalised because they can't take the demand, you could have something like Cruachan. And there's other pump storage schemes out there, not just Cruachan. There's Corrie Glass up at Loch Lochay, there's Red John at Loch Ness, and there's some schemes down in Wales. So we're confined by geography to where we can be, because you need quite a big mountain and a lower loch. So it's not everywhere in the UK that have that sort of facilities. But there are places around the Highlands, particularly the West Highlands, parts of Wales, that are very, very suited. They're just not well connected to the grid, unfortunately. They tend to be rural locations. But in saying that can be overcome. And hydropower's always played a big role in rural Scotland. Power from the Glens it came post-war, and it created a lot of employment post-war for people in the rural areas, places like Argyll and the West Highlands of Scotland. And we see Cruachan and other facilities not quite replicating that levels of employment opportunities, but certainly very positive socio-economic benefits to Argyll.
That's fantastic to hear. I think we're out of time now for this session, but thank you very much, Steve. And it's fantastic to hear about how that can play a role in the renewable grid in the future.
Yeah, just there is a website for the expansion of Cruachan, so I'll post a link on here and people can visit and see what our proposals are.
That'd be great. Thank you. Is Andy Clements in the?
Yep, I'm here.
Hi, Andy.
Hi, Ron.
It'd be great to talk to you next, if that's good with you.
Yep, that's no problem. Yep. Well done in keeping this going tonight.
No worries. We're getting there. As soon as you pop up. well, I can start chatting now actually. So Andy is the renewables manager on GEAR. GEAR has, correct me if I'm wrong, 4 wind turbines owned by the community. And you were the first community-owned, grid-connected wind farm in Scotland in 2004, which was very exciting. So yeah, thank you very much for coming, Andy. Can you start by telling us a little bit about GEAR and how the turbines fund the community and what that dynamic is, what the structure of the GEAR Wind Farm Trust is?
It really goes right back to the beginning, where we were owned by a private landlord. We had the chance to buy the island. The first vote went against it because we thought, no, there's no way we can get that money together. And the end up MSPs came up and convinced us. We went forward with that, and we had a lot of money to pay back. We had an island to run, so we had to come up with some kind of vehicle to bring finances into the trust. So it was actually one of the previous trust managers. He came up with the idea, actually on the back of a fag packet, to put up 3 wind turbines. Not an easy thing to do, with a population at the time of 92 with absolutely no experience. So we got a lot of advice from all different people. Alan, the previous trust manager, Alan Hobbit, came up with the kind of concept of how we could fund it through shares and just loans, and there was different ways we did it, which actually works. So we consulted the community all along the way, and in the end up we got 3 wind turbines up. As we call them, they're pre-loved, which is second hand. They came from Haverick down in Cumbria, and they bring in between 75 and 90,000 pounds a year. Now, what happens with that money is that is reinvested into the community, and it helps. Well, we had more or less every single house on GEAR, which was just in a really bad state of repair. I think it was 95% of the houses was below tolerable standards. We had to bring those up to a standard. And that's where the turbines come in. We also had the community hotel as well. That was intended to bring money in as well, but not like the turbines, nothing like that at all. And there was a lot of investment needed in the hotel. So the idea was to stick with the turbines, and it's worked very, very well, to the point we ended up buying a 4th one, which has been very successful as well. Very successful.
It's such an inspiring story. I really, really love it that you.
It is.
Together
it's something you can keep going on about, but yeah, only go wrong.
No, I was just marveling at it really, but I was wondering if you feel like that's sort of saved the community on GEAR in some way. If that's, you know, part of the reason that it's still so successful today is because the turbines have come in and provided that alternative income to the island.
It's not really just the turbines, you know, at the end of the day, it's the whole community. We've now got a say in what we can do on GEAR. We you know, for our future now, you know, people have got their own businesses now, whereas before, that didn't really happen. You know, the landlord before wouldn't sell you an area of ground to build you know, yourself a new business. It just didn't happen. Whereas now, the community is working together. Yes, it's had its problems along its way. It always will have. You know what I mean? When you've got, well, we've now got 165, 170 of a community now, trying to keep all those people happy at the one time, it's never going to happen. Never going to happen. So there's always going to be, not fallouts, but, you know, discussions, heated discussions. And that's where community to village hall meetings, it's good fun sometimes. But no, I think now, you know, we are definitely in a place where we're moving on with a load of different projects. You know, I mean, we have to embrace tourism as well, as much as sometimes we don't want to. There's not everybody wants to, but we have to embrace it. We have to, you know, we have to look at the future, and that's something else we're doing just now. So
yeah. That's extremely exciting. I want to just ask you one last question, which is, how transferable is this to other communities on the West Coast? In Argyll, I live up in Tyrviealach, which is just up the way. Would it be possible to do a similar thing and bring the same benefits to somewhere like Tyrviealach?
I think the advantage we've had, as I said at the start, we own our own land. I think getting the land, and I think it's getting the funding as well now. And it's not just the funding, it's getting the support from whoever the turbine manufacturer is. It's getting the support from them to keep your turbines going. You know what I mean? That's something we've, especially during COVID, it's hit us really hard as well, because you can't get the engineers here as quickly because of where we are in Argyll. We've had issues with COVID, we've had issues with the rest of me. Thankful, you name it, there's been problems all along. And I think it's just where we are. We're quite lucky with the dancing ladies, the 3 Vestas turbines, because Vestas are still based in Campbelltown and we have a very good relationship with them. Enercon, unfortunately, based in Glasgow, and we've had the big Enercon down since November till May. We've lost in the region of 130 to 150,000 pounds, which should be going back in the community. We've not got that this year, and that's just because of COVID, Brexit, and just where we are.
Yeah, keep your suppliers close, isn't it?
But it can be replicated elsewhere. I think it's just funding nowadays. There's a lot of red tape as well, and I'll not say too much about Argyll and Bute, but there's a lot of problems there as well. It can be helpful, but there's a lot of issues we have to overcome, and I think it's something as Argyll and Bute, we've got to work more closely together. And I think if we can work together as a community, as in communities of wind turbines and renewables, I think if we can work together and share a story, share the downfalls, the joys, everything, I think we have to share it. And I think something we've not done for a long while. I used to be all over the country giving talks left, right, and centre. It's not happened so much, but I think it's something we need to talk. We need to share these. Just to help other communities. It's something we have to do.
Yeah, well, it's really inspiring to hear about it, and I'm really hopeful that it will catch on, and that the funding may even come from the government or something with their Green Investment Bank to start these projects off, because they're so long term and there's so many benefits. I'm afraid we have to move on.
Oh, sorry.
We're out of time. Yeah,
okay.
Thank you.
Right.
There's someone in the chat who's actually said, well, lots of people saying it's inspiring, but someone that's been to Egg said that they were moved to tears by the boards explaining how you financed the turbines, which I thought was really sweet. So that's really inspiring story.
And we paid it all. We paid it all back, which was the main thing. So credit rating.
Exactly. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Last energy speaker is Adele, who's coming to us from Orkney. And Adele, hi Adele, how are you doing?
Great. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah. Wow, it's going so smoothly all of a sudden. Thank you for joining us, and thanks for joining us again. It's fascinating the work you've been doing in Orkney. So Adele was a project manager on the hydrogen project in Orkney, and is now part of the Orkney Council as the climate change project officer. So could you, Adele, just give us a quick overview of what the hydrogen project is in Orkney and how it came about? Why was it needed?
Yeah, so kind of as discussed by some of the other speakers already, the communities in Orkney, so we're made up of a lot of different islands, a lot of inhabited islands, and the same way they set up community development trusts and established their own community wind turbines. Our conditions in Orkney are, we have basically got a limited capacity to export electricity from the wind turbines onto the mainland. So we're definitely not unique in Scotland with that. So from 2012, we actually had a moratorium on new grid connections for renewable technologies. We were just at capacity. So we had something called the Active Network Management Scheme, which was run by SSEN, which is the grid operator. And they basically allowed sort of drip feed turbines and renewable developments to come onto the grid, and they were able to manage this in zones. So in theory, the community turbines and other turbines would be able to access the grid. But what actually happened was we experienced much more curtailment. So we had around 60% curtailment some of the time, which meant that the communities weren't able to collect their feed-in tariff, because one of the conditions of signing up to the active network management scheme was that you forego the balance of payments that you might get if you're on the mainland. So there was just no energy, no electricity, and no payments. About 60% windy time. That's right. There's a really small amount of what we would call a firm connection, and most of that's taken up by the oil terminal. So really, the hydrogen projects came on board to use the energy in that time that it would otherwise be curtailed and switched off. So there was already a kind of pre-existing market condition, but also a need to kind of save that energy from being wasted. So we're about 135% of our electricity demand comes from renewables at the moment, but electricity maybe makes up, if I'm being generous, I'm just trying to work it out, somewhere not maybe just over 10% of our total energy demand. So where the hydrogen comes in, so it's fully green hydrogen. We have 2 different wind turbines on 2 different islands, and we have a hydrogen electrolyzer connected. So we have 2 sites basically on Orkney. They are over sea, so we have some fun getting it from the smaller islands to what we call mainland, which is mainland Orkney, the original mainland.
And I don't imagine there's any pipes built.
That's right. It's all... No pipes, no. And also the roads are not designed to take heavy transport at all. So we had to specifically design the energy system to firstly produce the hydrogen, then store the hydrogen, transport the hydrogen, and then also demonstrate the uses of the hydrogen. So we use hydrogen in transport. So we have 5 vans as a council. We use it for heating. So the local primary school in Shaffansy's got a hydrogen boiler. We reconvert it back into electricity. So in Orkney, the ferries are like our buses. So we have a fleet of 13 ferries that run. But when they sit at the dockside, they still require energy. So the hydrogen provides electricity for the ferries at that dockside. And then we have things, like refueling stations. We've been working on, standardizing connections. We've had to do a lot of work around logistics, training skills. What can we do on the island? As was just mentioned by Andy there, it can just be a deal breaker for a project if you can't get an engineer, or it's going to cost you, up many thousands of pounds sometimes to come and look at a part, or a part has to be custom made or things like that. So we started off with these innovative hydrogen projects attached to the community wind turbines. The community development trusts on each island were actually partners in the project. So there was this kind of equitable model of partnership. It was, I think we kind of got really lucky with the timing. So those projects kicked off in 2016, and we had, a burgeoning sort of maritime renewable industry for 20 years prior to that. But people just seemed to be ready to hear the solution. We've had visitors from all over the world, just hundreds and thousands of people coming to see the equipment on all the islands and things like that. And then from these initial projects, we've had ferry projects, so looking at using hydrogen on board to kind of run lights and heating, as well as propulsion, so actually propelling the ferries in the sea. We've had to develop specific safety training courses, and we've had to have those accredited by the maritime organisations, which just took years for that to happen. So we're just bumping up against legislation as we go, and then we just kind of come to the next iteration of the projects as they go on. So we've had
it's such an inspiring story.
it's just loads going, and it just keeps going and keeps going. And it's kind of around these fuel like energy systems, almost enclosed energy systems, and then other communities taking like the model's the same. You know, you do your assessment, you do your baseline, you look at your pinch points, you look at the assets or your potential for assets, and then we've been really lucky that we have a really active kind of community. We have public, we have private, we have community organizations, and we all kind of apply together. We've had international partners that have partnered in, so we've had a lot of money from European funding. I'm not sure how it is in your area, but Orkney has certainly benefited, you know, exponentially from EU funding. We've had funding from the Scottish government and from now the UK government as well. So it's kind of all those little pieces. And then we have kind of like a really active sort of local rolling strategies for various strands of energy development. So we have a localized hydrogen strategy, we have a local EV strategy, we have a sustainable energy strategy. Yeah, so you know, it's not perfect, but it's sort of that part of like demonstrating and having things to look at, and you know, testing out equipment and seeing where the failures are, where the successes are. And often, you know, it's a piece of paper that says something. That's why I can't do it.
So, and that can be changed. And
that's right.
Changed.
Yeah, and then they say, well, demonstrate it. So, for example, one of our tube trailers, we have 5 tube trailers that carry 250 kilos of hydrogen each, specifically designed for Orkney, and they were made by a Spanish company in Aragon. So they're a very similar region to us, but in Spain, lots of rural areas. The hydrogen's reinvigorating their economy there. And yeah, they had to build this tube trailer, and they're expensive. They're about 350k, and they had to build it and crash it just to prove, you know. So the first one, so it's things like that, and then they go, okay, and then you tick off the safety box, and suddenly you have a product that you can take to market. So it's been really great in that way.
Well, you're leading the way, and as you know, Owen was saying with his sea farming, that it opens the doors for everyone else, and that's really, really important, because everyone else is going to be interested in coming along behind, going, oh well, it's been 10 times easier to do it the second time than it has been the first time. But that means that maybe Argyll can do something similar when we have excess renewables in the future, that is. We're out of time, unfortunately, but I did want to just make it clear to anyone that might not have known that hydrogen's really important, because of course it doesn't emit CO2 when it's burned, so it's just oxygen and water. But I'm sure lots of you will know that already. Thank you very much, Adele. It's great to have everyone back in the main room. So I think now we might be hearing from Jenny Minto, because she's got to leave at past, and we would love to hear from her before moving on to our final topic, which is transport. Are you in the room, Jenny?
Yeah, I am, Rowan. Hi.
That's great. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you very much. I was saying to Freya that if I didn't leave at 9:30, you would hear my stomach rumbling from Leith in Knapdale. So apologies for that. I have found this event completely inspiring. It's just amazing hearing so many positive stories about what people have done with regard to renewables and the climate challenge and biodiversity. I have just got screeds of notes down. I thank you very much for inviting me along. I always find I walk away from these meetings with lots of thoughts and lots of learning. So thank you very much. I was asked to think about what has inspired me from what people have been saying. And I think very simply, the word that I've written down, I think with every single person that's spoken, is community, whether it's the 3 turbines or the 4 now on GIA, community working together, whether it was Roger talking about the community under the soil, which is 10% larger, or I think he said, than the one above it. I really like that idea. having first moved to Ireland and tried to learn about gardening, it was through using no pesticides that I was being taught, so the importance of the worms and all the beasties. So that was really, I found really important. And then also, I think Owen talked about the Community Benefit Society and local investment from communities to find solutions to problems. So that's what I find inspiring. I think we've got people across Argyll and Bute that are trying to find solutions. Just been in the breakout group and we talked about even more about Orkney, which is just amazing. And wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to replicate that in Argyll and Bute? And there are lots of organisations that are working closely together, trying to get community ownership within the wind turbine fields. And I'm seeing somebody's coming in with tidal developments there. And yes, there was meant to be one off in the Sound of Islay, which I think we all hope will start again, because clearly Islay, with all its whisky distilleries, is a very high user of heat, so therefore needs to get a better source and continuous source of power onto the island. And I think that was something else that Adele was talking about just in our breakout group, which I think we could really explore even more, is having local networks. Instead of thinking about putting everything into the centre, but think about how we can generate and use electricity that we are making close by. And Adele talked about all the farms on Islay, on all the Orkney Islands, and how they were able to generate their own energy. So I think that's really important. So my learning there is the importance of thinking local, and whether that's from an energy perspective, but also what Wallace was talking about, the food and the food miles. Now, I was very pleased. I was in a supermarket in Edinburgh last week, and the guy beside me was doing exactly the same as what I was doing, looking for the ones with the Scottish flags on it, because that meant less food miles. So it's things like that. And again, I think we've learned so much through COVID about how communities work together, and the importance of local shops, and the importance of getting our produce into the shops. And I think I was off a meeting earlier today, and we were talking about the schools and school dinners, and trying to get that brought much more locally, as opposed to having food travelling miles and then being reheated up in kitchens. So I think that's something else that we need to really consider. So Rowan and Freya asked me about what I would take on, what I would take to Parliament with me. Well, I have got, as I said, I've got so many notes. One thing that I found really positive was James's comment about the pace of solutions. And I think that's what Parliament really has to understand. I mean, we've had debates. I spoke in a debate last week about net zero, and there's another debate this week. And somebody said in a debate maybe a couple of weeks ago, it's also thinking about, right, we can talk about it, but what are we going to do? So I was really heartened when James said that there's a pace of solutions. So we need to find out more about them. And then also it's the conversations that I can have with the ministers, whether it's Mary McCallan about land reform, as somebody mentioned in the group that I was in, and also the Cabinet Secretary, Michael Matheson, as well, about just the way how we get communities more involved and ensure that they are supported through the community benefit, but also shared ownership. So if you don't mind, I think I've spoken for 5 minutes.
That's perfect.
What just to let you know, my food miles aren't that much. We're having some venison from Islay, which my husband has made into a fantastic stew, and it's been cooked with vegetables from our own allotment. So that's what we've been doing as well across lockdown. In fact, actually, since we moved to Islay, is having our own allotment and reducing our food miles. So I'm looking forward to potatoes and onions and beetroot from our garden. So thank you very much for inviting me along, and I'm looking forward to the next one, because I always come away with huge learnings from this. So thanks a lot,
you, Jenny.
And I'll see you sometime soon.
Yeah,
and
thank you very much.
Questions, I'm sure you can put my email on the chat, and if anyone wants to email me, then we will endeavour to get back to you as soon as possible. Okay,
thank you, Jenny. That was fantastic.
Thanks.
Enjoy
Cheers.
your dinner. Bye.
Thank
bye.
you very much. I'm looking forward to it. Bye.
we are going to switch to Kira, yeah, because we're going into the transport section. We're going to just do the two speakers and probably drop the discussion because we're aware that it's already 9:30. So this won't take as long. It'll probably be 15 minutes. But thank you very much, Kira. And we're going to start with Andy.
Great. Well, thank you, Ron. Just before I come to Andy, because we're going to drop our discussion afterwards, please do put any questions or thoughts into the chat as you've been doing all night. And if you've got any questions in particular for Andy regarding transport, he's our only transport speaker who's actually in the room today. Not meaning to put you on the spot, Andy. Then maybe he can have a look at them just as we're closing down for in our last session. So please do put any questions in there, and we'll start a bit of chat in the chat. And thank you. Okay, great. So coming on to transport, like I say, we have two speakers today. One is Andy Smith from Loganair, and our second is Kevin from CMAL, who own and operate the Calmac ferries. He's going to come via a video we'll play in a moment. Andy, lovely to meet you in person and not just over email. Just before we begin, if Andy's feeling a little bit sleepy, I know it's getting late, give yourself a bit of a shake, wake up, get started again. Here we go. Okay. So Andy, thanks for joining us from Loganair tonight, who are Scottish-based and operated aviation business. Of course, we know that aviation is a highly emitting way to travel, especially with domestic flights when we're measuring them per passenger mile. And just to get some of the facts and figures out there, global aviation accounts for 2.5% of CO2 emissions and 3.5% of warming, given the high number of these emissions. And pre-pandemic, these emissions were growing 4 to 5% annually. Of course, that's the global picture, and we're talking locally here today. So Loganair is Scotland's airline, as we say. Most of the destinations are in Scotland, some further south in UK and a few in Europe. Mostly those are in Norway, so just over the sea to our neighbour. And of course, it's really important to say they do provide an important service for many rural communities across Scotland. So really pleased to have you here, Andy, tonight because of that, and also because of some of the interesting things we think that you are looking at within your business. So I'm going to start off just with this question, which is, Andy, could you just give us as an opening, what are your plans around decarbonising your services? Because I know that is something that you are starting to look at.
Absolutely, yeah. That's literally my day job. So we are working with a number of different innovative technology partners. We've been running some trials up in Orkney over the course of the summer, and those projects are continuing, looking at battery electric technologies and also hydrogen as a potential fuel source, which was discussed quite a bit earlier. And we're also looking at sustainable aviation fuels, which are currently bio-based fuels, but like biodiesel. But in the future, these will probably be power to liquids, where essentially we take green hydrogen and direct air captured carbon and synthetically create a hydrocarbon fuel. Loganair's fleet tends to be quite small relative to other airlines. The largest aircraft we have is 70 seats. And we believe that those types and that size of aircraft will quite effectively convert to hydrogen as a fuel source over the coming decade into the late 2030s.
Oh, fantastic. I think this kind of wanted to ask you a question about sort of the prioritising or priority to decarbonise short-haul flights. They're obviously, as we say, per passenger mile, highly emitting. But I think it's really interesting that your business is your business, and you are looking at a solution for this. I guess as a relatively small emitter in the bigger picture of aviation, why do you feel it's so important that you decarbonise as fast as you can?
Well, primarily it's because we have the opportunity to do so. Larger wide body aircraft, and it is important to keep it into context. I mean, within UK aviation emissions, domestic flying accounts for only 4%. It's a very small proportion. In fact, domestic emissions from aviation are less than all of the emissions from diesel trains in the UK. It's a relatively small part of the piece of the puzzle. But having said that, it's every industry has to push ahead and decarbonize. It's simply not acceptable for anybody to sit there and still plan to be using hydrocarbons come 2030, 2040. Ideally, you would start with the larger aircraft first, because that's where the bulk of the emissions come from within aviation. But the reality is that the technology is most applicable to the smaller aircraft first. So it gives us an opportunity to decarbonize our operations first, but also to mature and develop the technology so that they're able to scale up to the larger aircraft, which is where we'll make the most impact within aviation.
Are there other small airlines around the world that are doing this, or are you kind of some of out there in front, I guess?
I think we're kind of out there in front. There are some other airlines, Ampere, who were testing their battery electric aircraft with us up in Orkney. They'd previously been flying it out in Hawaii. There are a lot of similarities around the world with other parts of the world which have disparate island communities with small populations, which make it quite hard to service efficiently with aircraft, but yet aircraft are an important part of the transport mix. So there's a lot of interest from around the world, and we're very much trying to share this information as much as possible to help everybody else move along in the same way.
Oh, fantastic. I had one other question and I've just totally forgotten what it was. Oh, I know what it was. I was going to ask, what are the kind of immediate barriers that you are facing in making this shift, or anything that you need to see change that will help you to make the change yourselves?
The main challenge is that aviation is obviously a very safety conscious business, and we've learned a lot over sort of the last 70, 80 years of commercial aviation. And so new technologies need to be really thoroughly tested out and investigated, and all the various failure modes properly explored before they can be certified, at which point airlines like us can go out and use them. So the frustrating thing is that we want to be adopting this technology, we want to be putting it into service now, but it's going to be several years before even the smallest aircraft are certified and approved. Having said that, there is really positive support across government and industry. I've been in aviation for over 20 years, and I've noticed a real mindset change of not so much do we have to decarbonize as when can we decarbonize, and that's been really encouraging. But the challenge is fundamentally one of physics, and the background, I guess, to it is particularly with hydrogen, as Adele was sort of explaining up in Orkney. They've done some fantastic work there to show how hydrogen production can be integrated into constrained grids. But we really need to see this broader green hydrogen economy start to take off across the country, Scotland and across the wider UK, but Scotland in particular, to provide the supply of hydrogen to these various key points. But there's a lot of opportunity also for intermodal stuff. A lot of what we do, looking at putting in hydrogen potentially at future sites down the road, also ties in with how we might decarbonize HGV transport and ferry transport, as Adele was saying. So it's really positive. It's just frustrating that we don't have time, and it's going to take some. So it's trying to push ahead to get things happening, but being a bit limited in terms of what can be done quickly.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Andy, for joining us today. I think you've actually given us a really nice segue there to bring us on to our video that we've got recorded with Brian, who's going to talk to us about some of the challenges that the ferries are facing, and also are taking some similar routes, I guess, looking at hydrogen, and they are also looking at a sort of transition point around LNG. So Andy, thank you very much. If you want to hang around, there are some questions in the chat for you, and we'll head over to hear from Brian now, I think.
Okay, I will try and share this. Wish me luck.
Thanks, Rosie.
Oh.
This is Kevin Hobbs, the CEO of
Sorry,
huge
Rowan,
amount.
let me try again.
That's right.
Okay, can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, well, thank you very much again, Kevin, for joining us today. So the first question is, what are the fastest ways that you...
Sorry, Rowan, I interrupted your introduction. Carry on.
No, all
Okay.
good. Kira's just done a great introduction today.
Okay.
have identified to reduce your carbon footprint within your business?
I guess there's several ways. Obviously, building new ships with new technology is the first port of call. That can be quite a lengthy process. We have to go through a statement of requirements to make sure we're building the vessels for the next 30 years, which are going to be fit for purpose. We also have to, at some stage, start looking at what technology is available. But the sort of the instant wins really are plugging ships in at port overnight. So we have 3 diesel electric hybrids which actually charge themselves overnight. So CMAL as an organization back in 2012 was the first company in the world to apply lithium-ion battery technology to shipping. We have 3 of those vessels out of our 31 on the west coast. So those are real live subject matters now. We've just embarked upon a program to replace 7 small vessels, which will be the next generation of those, and we are extremely hopeful they can be fully electric. So that's good, but the process takes about 4 years from statement of requirements through tendering to actually build a vessel. So that's not particularly quick, but vessels that are alongside overnight, certainly the big vessels, they have something called a hotel load, so for lighting and fridges and freezers and aircon and stuff like that. The intention is to plug those vessels in at port overnight so that the diesel generators on board aren't used any longer. So that's something we can do quite quickly.
Fantastic. So ships are a large investment, and they are a huge piece of equipment, and often are operational for more than 20 years. Could you just talk a little bit more about how you are changing the design of ships now to support future technologies that are still in development?
So if we look at our fleet on the west coast, which obviously is part of the Argyll and Bute area, we basically break them down into two sections. So we have major ferries that look like ferries, and then we have the smaller vessel fleet, which are double-ended, look more like landing craft. I mentioned earlier on that the first ever diesel electric hybrids were developed by CMAR back in 2012. Another was delivered in 2014 and another in 2016. So they are 3 small ones. Next generation, definitely electric. So we're adding 7 in phase 1 and another 3 in phase 2. So out of 17 current vessels, when we finish with that program, we would effectively have the 3 original ones plus another 10. So 13 out of 17 at that stage would be electric, which obviously with plugging in and the emergence of wind farms and tide and wave power, that is really, greening that section. Unfortunately, that isn't the majority of the emissions. The majority of the emissions come from the big ships. There isn't really a solution for big ships at the moment for zero carbon. What I can say is there's an awful lot of work going on in relation to transition fuel. So that's LNG. LNG has a carbon footprint of about 25% less in terms of its carbon, but it almost reduces nitrous oxide, sulfur oxides and particulates to 0. So that is a transition fuel. It is not the end game. As an organization, we are involved in a collaboration with St Andrews University and across Europe with a project called High Seas, and that is looking at the first ever hydrogen powered ferry. There are 2 sources of hydrogen potentially. There's obviously electrolyzing water, which produces H2, and there's also ammonia. That is a more dense, being NH3, so that's a more dense product. So when we're looking at the ferries at the moment, we haven't got the final answer for the big ferries, so they will be traditionally powered and or powered by this transition fuel LNG, but because a ship should be operational for 30 years, we're designing it in such a way that it can be retrofitted for hydrogen power when that technology is proven. So there is a very clear path to trying to get to zero carbon at the moment, but in shipping, the zero carbon is more than likely going to be electric for smaller ferries, and for the larger ferries, obviously hydrogen. But the hydrogen technology is not quite there yet. But I think with the project that we're working on at the moment, that at least the design of a vessel should be there by the end of next year. Obviously, you would then have to build it, providing there is somebody that will fund it. There is one thing for sure, which I think probably the general public appreciate on the one hand, but don't appreciate on the other. When we're looking at this type of technology, the ships will be a lot more expensive to build, and they will be more expensive to operate. So it's not a zero-sum game. It doesn't save money. It actually costs money. But having said that, it's the right thing to do, so it has to be done.
So this kind of brings us on to our final question, which is, what do you see, and I think you've touched on this, but as the biggest barriers to quickly cutting carbon emissions of your fleet? And is there anything perhaps that's an external factor that's out with your control, or can anything else that's standing in the way that you would like to see addressed?
Not really. I mean, obviously funding is one issue. You know, luckily for us, we have received a 5-year settlement from government of 587 million to start this process. So we're on with that now. There has been a lack of investment in the past 20 years, which we are very, very cognizant of. But given our funding mechanisms, which is government money, the government has to, at the end of the day, decide where the priorities lie. And unfortunately, you know, the ferries haven't received as much as we feel that they need to. That is now being remedied from this financial year 21-22 through to 25-26. So I think that we're in a good space with, you know, quite a large sum of money, close to 600 million, and you know, that is very, very good.
Great, thank you very much, Kevin. That's been wonderful, really insightful. Thank you for taking the time to record with us today. Great, thanks for that. So that was Kevin Hobbs, and because I forgot to introduce him before the video started, just to say that Kevin is the CEO of CMAL, which is Caledonian Maritime Assets. They, amongst their portfolio, are 31 ferries that are operated by CalMac, the big ferry operators, and 5 that are Serco Northlink, so they're the ones around Orkney and Shetland. And also they have 26 ports operating the west coast of Scotland, so a big player in ferries and shipping in Scotland. Globally, shipping represents 1.7% of greenhouse gas emissions, and obviously CMAL are a tiny proportion of that, but really encouraging to hear again some of the steps that they're taking, and steps in the future as well. Thank you. So I'm going to pass back to Rowan now. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it's Freya. Yeah, I think you're right.
So we've already heard from Jenny Minter, who's the MSP for Argyll and Bute, but we just wanted to have a quick comment from Jackie Bailey, who is the MSP for the Dumbarton constituency. So for a lot of the people from Helensburgh and surrounding areas that are on this call. Jackie, are you still on the call?
Yep, I am. And can I just say how frustrated I was that we couldn't question CMAL, because their ability to deliver ferries on time for some of the island communities is really questionable, but that's clearly for another day. Can I say, like Jenny, I found the entire discussion really both instructive and quite inspiring. I think certainly from my perspective, COP26 is going to be really important in trying to bring a focus to a lot of this work. I have to say, though, that I don't know whether the signs are good, bad, or mixed, if we're being honest about what's likely to happen. But I am always encouraged by communities leading, because I think where communities lead, governments follow. I wish it was the other way around, but I suspect we will wait a while to see that happen. In Scotland, I'm very conscious that there are ambitious targets. They're very welcome. But so far we've gone for the low-hanging fruit. Taking it to the next level will require a degree of commitment that I hope will be there across the Parliament. But there are undoubtedly lots of opportunities, and some of them we've heard this evening. The one thing I haven't heard, and forgive me for being slightly critical about this, is the impact on disadvantaged communities, because I'm really conscious that, today we're talking about an energy price rise crisis. What's going to happen? We've abandoned plans for a national energy company, and there are real challenges here for people in communities on low incomes. And actually, some of what we need to do in terms of climate change needs to be done on an equal basis, so that people in our poorest communities aren't paying more than anybody else as a result of this. So I want the government, both at UK level, at a Scottish level, and indeed governments across the world, to look at what does a just transition mean. We've had a commission. It was scrapped earlier this year. It was wound up. What's happened to those recommendations? Nobody's responded to them. So the reality is, I think there's really positive stuff, but I actually think there's a lot more that needs to be done if we're serious about this. A just commission in relation to jobs needs to go hand in hand with a rejection of Cambo, but I am really concerned that we are debating this at a level that we do not take our local and disadvantaged communities with us. So I will end on that note. Other than that, I thought it was great, and we need to do more clearly in the Scottish Parliament to echo some of the issues that you've been bringing forward. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Jackie. That's really, really, well, it's a point that we'll definitely take on board, because we know that this isn't a representative group, in that we've got time to organise these events, and we're very privileged in our position of, being able to put this on and volunteer and all of that. So thank you, and thank you for your comments, and I'm glad you liked the rest of the event. That is the end. Sorry it's so late, and sorry for the trouble at the start, but we are finished, and thank you all for turning up. There's been so many people and so much support putting on this event. It's been fantastic. There are a few things that you can do afterwards. There's a form that is to put your contact details on, so that if you want to get in touch with anyone else that you've met here, or the speakers, or the politicians are quite easy to find, then please fill that out, and we'll be sharing the emails between each other so that we can continue this conversation. And the film that didn't play at the start will also be circulated. It's also in the chat, but it's worth a watch. It's about Argyll's hopes for the future. So thank you all very much, and we'll be back for something else, but we don't know what yet.
Can I just interrupt? Someone save the chat, and will the chat be available?
We will do. No worries. Thank you particularly to Rosie and Freya, who've been real heroes getting it all going.
And to Rowan. And thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah.
Have a good evening.
Goodbye all. Thank you.